The moon hung like a silver lantern in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the ancient graveyard. The air was thick with a chilling fog that seemed to rise from the very earth itself, curling around the headstones like ghostly tendrils. I shivered, not just from the cold, but from the ominous feeling that settled in the pit of my stomach. Why did I agree to this? I whispered to myself, regret gnawing at the edges of my mind. My friends had dared me to spend the night alone in the graveyard, a rite of passage, they claimed. It was all in good fun, they assured me. But as I stood there amidst the silent stones and shadowed trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. I clutched the flashlight tightly in my hand, its feeble beam slicing through the darkness like a fragile lifeline. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of fear down my spine. I cautiously stepped forward, my footsteps echoing eerily in the stillness. The moonlight played tricks on my eyes, casting strange and shifting shapes across the gravestones. It was as if the very souls of the departed were trying to communicate, their whispers carried on the wind. My heart raced as I walked deeper into the heart of the graveyard, the ancient tombstones looming like silent sentinels. I tried to shake off my unease, reminding myself that it was all in my imagination. But then, a chilling breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it a mournful sigh that seemed to echo from the very depths of the earth. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Get a grip, I scolded myself, forcing my feet to move forward. I focused on the task at hand, determined to prove my bravery to my friends. I approached a particularly weathered gravestone, the name and dates worn away by the passage of time. I held my breath, half expecting the ground beneath me to give way and drag me into the depths below. As I shone my flashlight around, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I whipped around, the beam of light dancing over the gnarled trees and tangled undergrowth. There was nothing there, just the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. My heart raced and a cold sweat broke out across my brow. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, just the oppressive silence of the graveyard. I took a shaky breath and turned back to the gravestone, determined to conquer my fear. But as I looked down, I saw something that sent a shockwave of terror through my body. The earth around the grave seemed to be shifting, a slow and deliberate movement that defied explanation. I watched in horror as dirt and soil crawled upward, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe and twist. It was as if the very ground itself was alive, a sinister force awakening beneath my feet. Without thinking, I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The flashlight slipped from my grasp and clattered to the ground, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled to retrieve it, my fingers shaking as I switched it back on. The feeble light illuminated the area once more, revealing the graveyard as it had been before. I forced myself to take a deep breath, my mind racing to rationalize what I had just witnessed. Maybe it was a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination brought on by the unsettling atmosphere. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. There was something malevolent here, something beyond my understanding. As I stood there, my breath coming in ragged gasps, a low and haunting whisper seemed to echo through the air. It was a language I couldn't comprehend, a dark and ancient tongue that seemed to crawl into my very soul. I stumbled back, my heart racing as I realized that I was no longer alone. Shapes began to emerge from the shadows, indistinct forms that seemed to dance and sway in time with the eerie chant. They were spectral and ethereal, neither fully present nor entirely absent. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing, and I felt as though I had stepped into a realm where the boundaries between the living and the dead had been blurred. A cold hand brushed against my cheek, and I let out a strangled scream as I turned to see a figure standing before me. Its features were twisted and contorted, a grotesque parody of humanity. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its voice was a guttural hiss that seemed to seep into my very bones. "You are trespassing," it whispered, its voice sending a wave of dread crashing over me. "This is our domain, our eternal resting place." I stumbled backward, my mind a maelstrom of fear and confusion. The figures around me seemed to close in, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. I felt trapped, ensnared in a nightmare from which there was no escape. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the figures receded back into the shadows, the chilling whisper fading into silence. I stood there, my heart pounding and my breath ragged, the graveyard once again shrouded in stillness. The moon hung overhead, its light casting a pale glow over the tombstones. I turned and fled, my footsteps echoing through the night as I raced toward the entrance of the graveyard. I didn't stop until I was outside its iron gates, the cold night air a welcome reprieve from the suffocating atmosphere within. As I caught my breath, I glanced back at the graveyard one last time. The figures were gone, but the memory of their presence lingered like a dark stain on my soul. I knew that I had encountered something beyond the realm of the living, something that defied explanation and understanding. And as I walked away from that accursed place, I couldn't help but wonder if the boundary between life and death was far more fragile than I had ever imagined, and that some things were better left undisturbed in the depths of the night.
The moon hung high in the velvet sky, casting an eerie glow over the desolate graveyard. The wind whispered through the gnarled branches of ancient trees, and a chill crawled down my spine as I stepped through the rusted wrought iron gates. The air was thick with a mixture of unease and anticipation. I wasn't sure why I had chosen to be here at this unholy hour, surrounded by tombstones that bore witness to lives long extinguished. The gravel path crunched beneath my feet as I wandered deeper into the heart of the graveyard. Shadows danced and stretched, distorting the shapes of the tombstones like macabre silhouettes. Each step echoed like a heartbeat, reverberating through the cold night air. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light that painted the surroundings in a disorienting dance of illumination. I paused beside a weathered mausoleum, its marble exterior marred by the passage of time. The door, half ajar, beckoned me with an inexplicable pull. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open and was met with a gust of stale air that seemed to carry the whispers of forgotten souls. The interior was a dim cavern of stone, illuminated only by the faint beam of my flashlight. The walls were adorned with ornate engravings, each depicting scenes of death and despair. My heart pounded as I realized that the air around me had grown colder, heavy with an otherworldly presence. I could almost feel the weight of their eyes on me, the spirits of those who rested here. I quickly backed out of the mausoleum, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I resumed my journey through the graveyard, the moonlight played tricks on my eyes, conjuring phantoms and shadows that seemed to move just beyond my line of sight. I strained my ears against the night, half expecting to hear the haunting wails of the restless dead. And then, a sound, a soft, melancholic melody that seemed to drift from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was a mournful tune, a dirge that sent shivers down my spine. I followed the haunting music, my steps guided by an unseen force. The melody grew stronger, pulling me toward a towering oak tree at the edge of the graveyard. Beneath its twisted branches stood a solitary figure, clad in tattered robes that fluttered in the wind. Their face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel their gaze upon me, a gaze that held a depth of sorrow and longing that chilled me to my core. Who are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely more than a whisper. The figure remained silent, their song hanging in the air like a spectral mist. With each note, a memory flashed before my eyes, a memory of my own mortality, of the inevitable fate that awaited me and all who walked this earth. I took a step closer, the pull of the melody irresistible. The figure's hand stretched out, beckoning me to join them. And as I reached out, I saw it. Their face, gaunt and hollow, eyes like twin orbs of darkness that held within them the abyss of all that had been lost. "No," I gasped, pulling back as the realization struck me. This was not a guide or a guardian of the dead. This was something darker, something that hungered for the essence of life itself. The figure's song shifted, growing louder, more insistent. It was no longer a mournful melody. Now it was a crescendo of agony and despair, a symphony of souls trapped in a never-ending torment. Panic clawed at my chest as I stumbled backwards, my heart racing. I turned to flee, my footsteps echoing through the graveyard, each one a desperate plea for escape. The moon seemed to dim, the shadows closing in as if the very night conspired against me. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't afford to stop. I crashed through the underbrush, thorns and branches tearing at my skin. The haunting melody pursued me, a relentless specter that seemed to chase me even as I fled. I could feel its icy fingers brushing against the back of my neck, a whisper of death's touch. And then, just as I thought I could run no more, I burst through the gates, stumbling onto the path that led to safety. The air was warmer here, the moonlight less oppressive. I didn't dare to look back, didn't dare to entertain the possibility that the figure was still there, waiting in the shadows. I made my way home, my heart still pounding, my mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. As I locked my door and collapsed onto my bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, a lingering presence that would forever haunt my nightmares. And even now, as I lay here recounting my tale, the memory of that graveyard at night, the mournful melody, and the figure in the shadows continues to gnaw at the edges of my consciousness. I can't escape the feeling that it's still out there, waiting for another unsuspecting soul to stumble into its grasp, to become another verse in its never-ending symphony of horror.